Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We will get started in just a moment here. We have quite a few people still joining, so we want to give everybody a chance to get into the meeting before we get started. Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and kick it off here today so we can get started. For those who are in attendance, and as people join, they can listen to the rest of the presentation as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar presentation, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm Allie Morton, Head of Field Marketing at LexisNexis IP, and I'd like to cover a few things before we get started. During the webinar, please feel free to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel. Also, in the control panel, you will see a handout section. This is where you can access files pertaining to today's webinar, including the webinar slides. You will also be receiving a follow-up email, including the recording and the slides from today's presentation. Now, I would like to turn it over to our presenters, Ben Hahn and Marco Richter. Thank you again, everybody, for joining.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Here from Bonn, my name is Benjamin Hahn. I am Director of Global Sales Strategy and Enablement at LexisNexis IP Solutions. And I'm looking forward to show you a lot of and share a lot of information on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and our patent perspective at LexisNexis IP. And presenting with me will be Marco Richter. Marco, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. We're seeing participants from the West Coast of the United States over all the way to Europe and Japan. So pretty amazing to see this interest in the topic here around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Marco Richter. I'm running global product and customer success at LexisNexis IP. And as Ben and Ellie had mentioned, we'll give you an introduction of how the world of patents can help to achieve these goals set up by the United Nations, which many nations and companies have subscribed to. We'll cover briefly the history of the SDGs, what they mean, how we map them to patents, and then how we bring them to life in our solutions, and how we make these insights actionable for our customers. That span from industry over to law firms and consulting companies. And with that, let's start and go into the presentation, overview of the agenda today. So we'll first give an intro to the Patentside product and the metrics that we have developed. Then we'll cover the SDG, brief recap, and then we'll look at who, from a global perspective, is driving the strongest efforts towards the SDGs, and do further drill down into a specific SDG, the SDG 13, Climate Action, and who the strong players and contributors are in that specific area. During the course of the presentation, we'll also give you a brief glimpse at the software to see how tangible that data really is. So it isn't just nice PowerPoint slides, but it's also being put right into the hands of our customers. And with that, let's go ahead. So, Patentside, founded in 2008 as a university spin-off from a leading German business school affiliated with Kellogg, and is based on decades of academic research around patents, patent indicators, and innovation management. The company has developed an indicator called the Patent Asset Index, which we'll cover briefly in a second, and has subsequently introduced the Patent Asset Index as the standard metric across industries and across the globe to measure technological and strategic advantage of individual patents, but also entire patent portfolios, and has made innovation insights truly actionable by bringing a meaningful measure to this space. Over the course of the years, Patentside has started to work with leading companies around the globe from all industry. Over half of the DAX are working with Patentside. Dozens of Nikkei companies and many Fortune 100 companies are our customers, as well as universities and leading law firms across the globe. Please continue, Ben. So what does Patentside do compared to the legacy systems and databases that are out there? In a nutshell, Patentside has cracked the fundamental problems of patent data and makes true patent analytics possible for the first time. So Patentside has solved the problem of incomplete ownership information. We have truly mapped all worldwide patents to their respective owners. So no more data cleanup necessary. We know which patents are active at what point in time. We have the so-called reporting date concept, which evaluates patent portfolios at any given point in time, depending on their legal status and the various indicators that we measure for that point in time. And we are overcoming legacy patent indicator problems by our Patent Asset Index approach, which we'll cover on the next slide. The Patent Asset Index is the only scientifically developed, peer-reviewed, and industry-wide adopted patent indicator that is out there. It is completely transparent in its approach, and it's a very beautiful, simple approach that looks at all the citations that a patent has received, takes care of the known fallacies around technology fields, patent office citation practices, and time lags. And the other indicator that contributes to the Patent Asset Index is the market coverage. Where in the world is a patent currently active? And we're not just counting the number of countries and jurisdictions that a patent is active in, but we're looking at the economic size, the economic potential of these countries. And by combining the citation-based indicator that we call technology relevance and the coverage indicator, which we call the market coverage, we get the competitive impact score for an individual patent family. And if we see a patent family with a competitive impact of 5, we know it's 5 times more valuable than an average patent in its field. And all the competitive impact scores of a portfolio summed up give us the Patent Asset Index. And the data could here be sliced and diced in any way. It could be an entire company's portfolio, a certain technology in a company, or down to an individual inventor. We can look at portfolios through all kinds of ways and lenses. And for example, also look at specific SDGs and see what the most relevant and meaningful patents are there. The Patent Asset Index does not give you a legal perspective on a patent, like how well does it hold up in court. It shows you the technological strength and difference that a patent in a patent portfolio makes and the innovative potential that's in there. However, we know from various case studies that we've done to validate the Patent Asset Index that patents with a high Patent Asset Index hold up better in court, are also more often litigated, survive litigation also without any changes to the patents. And you see that here in the chart on the left-hand side. That these patents that had been in invalidation procedures and opposition procedures are on average 8 times more valuable than the average patents in the database, and definitely much more valuable than patents that were later on abandoned by their owners. We also know that they are much more likely to be commercialized, they're much more likely to be representing a standard relevant patent, and so on and so forth. So the Patent Asset Index is a fantastic proxy to determine the high value and the low value patents in a portfolio, and thus identify disruptive technologies, give you the most likely M&A target to look out for first, and help you in, for example, day-to-day decisions like pruning, licensing, and so on and so forth. The Patent Asset Index and the database that we compiled around it, together with the software interface that we'll see in a couple minutes, is utilized by blue chip companies around the globe and also by governmental bodies, and is used in various scenarios. For example, in investor communication, up to the annual report of companies. And if you've ever worked on an annual report or contributed to it, you know how hard it is to get any data point in there, because that will be scrutinized by the investors and will be questioned. And we have numerous examples where CEOs around the world put these indicators in their annual reports and stand up to all the investor questions that come there. You also see here the European Commission as one of the bodies using the database, and we have an example on the next slide where we're showing that how the European Commission has used the database in the merger scenarios of Dow DuPont and Bayer Monsanto, the largest chemical mergers in history, to evaluate whether the merging parties should be allowed to conduct the merger or not. And our data had been fundamental for the decision making in both cases, and led to the divestiture of billions of dollars worth of assets in both merger cases in the agrochemical space, because the Commission saw that the innovative landscape would be completely tilted and future innovation would be stifled by these mergers. Now, with all these great use cases that we had developed around in the corporate sector, and mainly employed by corporate IP departments, R&D, and by the supporting law firm communities, we, of course, were always open to see what other interesting communities are out there that might be interested in patent information. So we made our first adventures in the investment community. The reason being very simple: innovation, and today's innovation, is a good proxy for the future outlook of a company. There's various studies out there that look into patents and patent portfolios and the likelihood of companies being successful or not. And by and large, these are very much favoring the patent holding entities to be survivors of crises, to overcome other major challenges. So we started exploring the financial industry, talked to tons of investors, quants, long-term investors, private equities, and so on and so forth, and came across the topics of ESG investment and subsequently the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations, and found that a particularly interesting angle to cover from a patent perspective and support the financial community with insights into these areas. In particular, that area is very hard for investors to evaluate, because it's based on so many subjective measures. And patents are a perfect global measure that are not subjective, that are rather objective. They're more or less the same for everyone. And they're transparent measure that I can easily observe from the outside. Now, shifting this over, and if you would go to the next slide, Ben, there's also a very strong overlap with the legal community. So quick research on the topics of SDG and ESG uncovers that many of the big names out there, essentially all of them, are covering the topics of SDG and ESG in one way or another. And why is that? Well, because corporates around the world are very, very interested, not just since the pandemic that hit us last year, but also way before, to see how they can contribute to a more sustainable society. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Ben to give us an intro to the SDG.
Thank you, Marco. So we will start the next section on how the SDGs can be mapped to patents with a very brief history of sustainability and being mindful of our time. We have tried to put this in one slide. So if we go back in history and look at history, we see that the idea of sustainability, wherever it occurs in history, emerges in times of crisis and scarcity. Around 1700, the mining industry was threatened in Saxony. And it was not that the mines had been exhausted, but the problem was acute scarcity of timber. And at that time, a German called Hans Carl von Carlowitz first came up with the idea of a sustainability. So that's the beginning. And you can see on the timeline, it took a while to establish that topic of sustainability. And as you can see on this slide, major UN conferences led to what we now are looking at with the United SDGs, which were concluded at the Paris with the Paris Agreement, which for the first time actually set priorities and measurable priorities and targets for the SDGs. So this is a short timeline, and if we go and take a next step, we would like to briefly introduce you how we approached and worked on the topic of the SDGs. So let's look at the purpose. The roadmap to global sustainability is the roadmap. And in a world where green politics can't be ignored anymore, we need tools to measure progress and success of environmental related challenges. And for that, one of the most famous and internationally accepted guidelines are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were launched in 2015. And these articulate a common purpose and serve as a roadmap to global sustainability. So stakeholders from all areas work towards achieving these goals, eventually leading to synergy effects. And we need, of course, big data and rely on big data. Because of these actions, we have more and more data available to measure the progress made in these areas. And this leads us to a scoring. We can observe and score also how efforts towards achieving the UN SDGs are affecting patent portfolios. Efforts regarding sustainability do not remain theoretical, but become tangible. And one way is looking into patents. And at the end, it's all about value, not also quantity. And that's where the Patentside approach and the LexisNexis approach comes into play. Excuse me, flip one back. So what we did is currently map 13 out of 17 SDGs to patent-related technologies. We, for this purpose, defined more than 100 technology fields that can be mapped to these SDGs, especially no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. And the way we approach this is using the UN's SDG targets and indicators and the goals as they are defined in the Paris Agreement and in the US and as they are laid out in the UN SDGs. Not using only generic searches, but they are based on targets and indicators and the metadata of each United Nations SDG. So more are covered than only those found in green inventory, for instance, used by WIPO, or other search strategies, which mainly rely on patent classifications. But we have really done a ton of effort, of course, to define this and make this accessible. And this is what we currently can cover. So as I've already mentioned, 13 of the 17 UN SDG goals that are trackable from a patent lens. And we will be looking at this a bit more closer in the next couple of minutes to make this topic of SDGs measurable, transparent, and that you also have a way with the Patent Asset Index to come to valuation of these SDGs on a macroeconomic level, but also from a company level, down even to a patent level. So from a bird eye perspective, down to a single patent. And how we are going to do this is going to be shown by Marco in the next section.
Okay, let's take a look at who's really investing in the area of sustainable development and who's just serving this with a lip service, as we're picking this up here from Mark Malloch-Brown. So patent data can reveal the true efforts that company put in there. And for the purpose of the presentation today, we put together what we call the LexisNexis PatentSight SDG dashboard, where we visualize what the SDGs look like from an overall perspective across the entire spectrum of currently active patent data. So in the top left corner, for example, you see how many patents were active around what we define as the SDG fields from the early 2000s and how that has developed until today. So you see a steep increase there in the gray line, the number of active patents, but also in the strength of these patents, the patent asset index. And what was very interesting for us in this context of analyzing the SDGs was that the patent asset index picks up patents belonging to the SDGs as roughly 50% higher evaluated than patents that do not stand in the context of sustainability. You see that in the small red column chart next to the line chart. So you see the 1.25 average competitive impact versus 0.85, which is quite astonishing. You also see that the drivers of sustainability around the globe are already the corporates. So they're the ones who are heavily and have been heavily investing in these areas, and they have the by far largest assets in the area and strongest assets as well. You see that there with a patent asset index who's even exceeding the portfolio size. Further, you're seeing that the chemical, the information and the electronics, together with the healthcare space, make up by and large over 50% of all the current efforts towards a more sustainable future. And you see that the largest areas around the SDGs, that's the bottom right corner there with the bar chart, are the SDGs 12, 9, and 11. So that's responsible consumption and air production, it's industry innovation and infrastructure, and it's sustainable cities and communities. These are, by the sheer number of active patents, the largest three areas. And then in the lower left corner, you see how the size of the entire database has developed over time versus the parts around SDGs. And the SDG patents make up now almost a quarter of the entire database with a strong increase and trend upwards. And you see the top 5 countries by both patent asset index and portfolio size. And that's what we'll look into a little bit further now is first of all the country perspective, and then switch gears and see who the biggest corporate players are and academic players. And for the purpose of the presentation today, we brought up a comparison of all the SDG related patents invented in the United States versus China. That's what you're seeing here on the screen. And you see that tremendous growth curve for China, especially since the late 2000 10 years. And that is pretty much in line with the overall growth of patenting activity in China. So both the SDG areas and the non-SDG areas in China are roughly growing by 24% per year in active portfolio size. For the United States, on the other hand, inventions coming out of the United States from inventors located there, there we see a much stronger increase in the SDG patents since 2010, that increases by roughly 6% per year, while the overall size of the non-SDG patents from the United States has only grown by roughly 1% per year. So a much stronger focus in the United States recently on SDG-related technologies. And then we can further break that down into the different areas of the SDGs. So spread it across the 13 SDGs, which we can map to patents and which are by and large very technology driven. And you see here the top 5 countries by portfolio size, so number of active patents, and where are the most dense patenting activities. And you see here the 9, 11, and 12 again, of course. But you also see, for example, good health and well-being, SDG 3, see some patenting activity. And then there's others where not a whole lot is happening yet. Now, it becomes really interesting when you switch gears here in this view, and instead of just looking at the number of the active patents, you're looking at the patent asset index. So who has the real innovative and impactful patents in these areas? And then the view changes a bit. You see Germany and South Korea switching positions here, but also the United States and China. So the United States, despite having fewer patents, have stronger patents in the area, in many of these areas than the Chinese counterparts. And you also see that SDG 3, for example, while one of the smaller areas before by sheer number of patents, that's one where there's a lot of true innovation happening and where companies have built very strong assets. Speaking of companies, and maybe Ben, why don't you switch back once again for the purpose of comparison. So we're again looking at portfolio size, and then forward again to look at portfolio strength, aka the patent asset index. Super. And then let's break this down even further and go from the country level to the company level. So who are the companies? Who are the top innovators in SDGs around the world? And you see 2 views here. On the left-hand side, you see a ranking by sheer portfolio size. So who has the most active patents around SDGs? And on the right-hand side, you see a little bit of a different both distribution, but also setup of companies where we're ranking by the strength, the innovative strength of the respective patents in the SDGs, which are represented in the green bar. So on the left-hand side, you see Toyota, Samsung, and Panasonic leading the pack by pure number, while on the right-hand side, you see Samsung, J&J, and Toyota leading by patent asset index. Further, you also see the other assets that these companies own, so the non-SDG patents, right? And also there, a lot of interesting things that you can observe. For example, LG Chemical on the left-hand side, or LG Chem, more than 50% of their portfolio is related already to the SDGs. So if LG is one of the many companies out there that are committing themselves to SDGs, looking into patents, we can see they're serving that purpose for sure. They have invested R&D dollars into it. They've invested dollars into patenting and protecting their technologies. And they're also very successful, as we see them also as one of the top players, according to the patent asset index on the right-hand side. We can skip to the next slide and do a similar view just for university and public research. So we're excluding corporates now from this view and are just looking at the top players in terms of number of patents in the area of academic research. On the left-hand side, it's a very, very similar to what you saw before, the green bar and the gray bar here representing SDGs versus non-SDG patents. And on the right-hand side, you see it by patent asset index. What's interesting here, first and foremost, that on the left-hand side, you see 9 out of the 10 players are from China, with 1 player from Russia in 4th position. But when you switch it to who has strong patents, who has impactful patents in the area, then all of a sudden we also see many American players popping up with the University of California, MIT, Harvard, and more. Just as a quick side note here, the Chinese Academy of Sciences is the largest patent-owning entity in the world. So in many of these types of analyses and queries, you'll see the Chinese Academy of Sciences holding significant assets simply by the sheer size, with way more than 100,000 active patents overall. And yeah, then we're taking it a little further. We're a little more granular, and we're starting to look into the area of climate action, SDG 13, green technologies. And here's a nice quote from the BlackRock CEO. And even the large financial behemoths like BlackRock have seen that sustainability matters, not only for their investments, but for sure for the companies and the communities that they're investing in. So let's look into the climate action one. So what we're looking at here are just patents coming from China, the US, and Japan, so invented in either of these 3 jurisdictions. On the left-hand side, you see how they overall developed patents from these 3 jurisdictions, and then on the right-hand side, you see a breakdown who are the top players when we limit to those 3 countries in the area of improving SDG 13 climate action. So we see there Toyota, General Electric, Panasonic, but also Sinopec, State Grid Corp, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and then further down a couple more. So pretty dominated here by the Asian players, and we see that also as an overall theme, that Asian companies and Asian countries by and large contribute a whole lot to the SDGs. Then again, we can further break this down, and instead of looking at just other overlaps with other SDGs here, we're breaking this down into the fields of invention, and we're using our proprietary clustering algorithm to give us an indication of what are the actual technologies that these players are investing in and that they're bringing forward to contribute to SDG 13. So Toyota, you really see here across the board, lots of things around battery technologies, the negative electrodes, electrode material in general, but also emission control, etc., etc. And you see a different spread here for each of these top 10 players, some more focused on the one area, some on the other, but Toyota is really in most of them. Go ahead, Ben. Yeah, and I think this is a good moment, Ben. Why don't you just quickly show us how this also can look like in the software? While you're moving that over, I'm picking up a question from the audience around the queries that we developed. We got them from the United Nations, or how we got there. So what the team did was a tremendous effort into looking into the documentation of the SDGs, looking into the publications from the United Nations around them, the topics, the actions, the goals, down to the individual keyword level that were used there, and to the individual indicator level as well, that each SDG and their actions are trying to capture and measure against. And then we translated that into a query that would cover these topics, and that led to 100 sub-technology fields that then pay into the 13 SDG goals that we have currently mapped through the lens of patents. So to sum this up, it's a proprietary search that we developed internally and that we're making available to the users of our databases and our software solutions. Ben?
Yes. So just to see how easy accessible this is, it's not only creating nice nice slides. We have these SDG technology fields available in the software. You can use this as a starting point for any analysis to drill down deeper into technologies, but also look at aggregated company data, or even go down to patent level data. And you can see here as an example, one of the analysis that we just showed you in the on the slides, the corporate portfolio strength when it comes to SDGs, and how much of Toyota Motors portfolios, for instance, related to SDG 12 in this case, SDG 9 and SDG 11, and how much of their share consists of each of these SDGs. As you can see, very easy to access. And the nice thing is you can, as I mentioned, drill down to further analysis and to specific technologies which are related to these SDGs.
Cool.
Okay, Marco, should we proceed to the next part?
Yeah, go ahead. So with this novel way of approaching the SDGs, we can further narrow these analysis and surface even more data points. And Ben will talk us through that here. Ben.
As you can see, we're currently looking here at patent data related to SDG 13, responsible climate action, sorry, and the share of the patent index in an entire company portfolio belonging to these climate-friendly technologies. This includes CBRNE, disaster management, and GHG reduction technologies. And as you can see, a company like Vestas Wind Energies already has 88% of its patent portfolio strength measured in patented index, covering the SDGs. And you can see that other companies have different shares here. Maybe a couple of interesting companies that show up that one would not immediately have in mind, like Merck, the German Merck company, not the US company, pharma and chemistry. As you can see, we can also break down, in this case, here a little shout out, break out for Toyota's portfolio, how Toyota's SDG portfolio looks like when we can see that there are their portfolio contributes a lot to climate action, as shown here in overall, but also they have 22% in the field of SDG 12, 26% for sustainable cities and communities, and also 32% for the SDG 9. You can see how you can measure that and how well distributed Toyota's portfolio is with regards to SDG.
Ben, let me just pick up a question here regarding the definition of fields again. So yes, we will, or we are making the definition of the fields transparent and have a description for each of the fields and the sub-targets and topics, and how we derive the search strategy and what to expect within these searches and what not to expect. And in principle, you can think of it as a continuum between do not harm. So we're trying to exclude technologies that are considered harmful, and prevention. So not even getting into a situation where you're developing something that creates a problem that then needs to be captured again, right? So rather preventive measures that we're covering. Yeah.
Let's switch then to a more even granular view on with a benchmarking perspective, again in the field of SDG 13. And this shows the Patentside index valuation methodology that can be used also to analyze not only the quantity, but not only the total portfolio strength, but also average quality of patent portfolios. As you can see on the low axis, you see the portfolio size of these companies that contribute to SDG 13 in terms of active patent families. On the high axis, you see the average quality as expressed by the average competitive impact, which is a proprietary Patentside metric which you can use. And again, on the right side, you can break it down to technology clusters, our AI-generated technology clusters, again, to take a closer look what is in this field. As you can see, a lot comes from electric power, not very surprising when we look at these companies, but you can see that you can also drill down into several other technologies to take a closer look on a patent level. And with that,
yeah, hold on just a sec, Ben. It's interesting how the questions keep coming in right now. Let me just tackle one here before we go to the next one. Was a question around the granularity, and we're covering here company level, covering here country level, but of course, you can slice and dice the data even further. You can slice it into various IPCs, these terms. You can look at it on an inventor level. You can look at filing trends over time or publication trends over time. So everything that you're used to do with patent data, you can of course also do around the SDG topics that we have defined here.
okay. So Marco, then take the last one from this section.
So what we're looking at here for the SDG 13, the climate action one, is how that's breaking down into areas of innovation with our beautiful sunburst visualization that you see in the center of the screen. So you see it's heavily driven by electric power, engines, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. And the team made a beautiful shout out here, or drill down, for two players that we've seen in the previous analysis. On the left hand side, you see an example of LG Chemicals, a drill down into the electrode materials, and a visualization of one of their strongest patents in the area there, to also show you how easy it is to of course get also down to the individual patent level to truly understand what's the technology behind electrode material, and then the player LG Chem here in that case. And likewise, on the right-hand side, the team took an example from Vestas out of the engines space, and it's around a wind turbine patent that Vestas owns.
Good. Just waiting. We have no questions in this section.
More questions. It just keeps scrolling. That's my problem here with all the questions. Let me just try to see a bit. If you make the technology classification of patents into the different fields by IPC, CPC, keyword publicly available. So all the fields come with a PDF document that describes how the fields were derived, what they're covering and not covering, how we conducted our search strategy from and for the specific field, and are broadly covering what topics IPC, CPC we're using. The exact and also keywords but the exact search string is not necessarily in there. And to give you an idea of the diligence that the team put in there, there's some search strings there that are 4 full A4 pages. I always forget what the American format is called, like, but basically a sheet of paper, and it's 4 sheets of paper. So wouldn't be really useful for the majority of the end users to look at that entire search string, but it's very clearly broken out how we derive the search strategy. So it's a great starter if you want to use that and create your very own strategy. However, all the fields, not just on the SDG, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 level are available, but also the sub fields that contribute to each of the SDGs. And Ben, I think that's a good question for you. The financial community that we spoke about in the beginning, what is the reaction that you're getting from the finance industry when it comes to patents and SDG investment?
Yes. We've seen a very big interest in the finance industry in terms of ask for alternative data related to ESG and related to SDG. So prior to the COVID and to the pandemic, a lot of hedge funds were focusing and wanted to understand and use patent data to assess sustainable investing, impact investing, ESG investing, many names for that, maybe similar topics. And what they find very helpful is that actually, as an alternative data, patent is forward-looking, not looking backward, and that is something that they rarely see with other kinds of data like geolocation data. It's always looking back, not looking forward, so they see big value. But previously, they struggled of consuming and making that accessible for analysis, whether it be for fundamental research or for quantitative analysis. Applying that to their algorithms and using patent data that has accurate owner level helps them to map that to their investment universe, and having valuation metrics like the patent asset index helps them to do investment decisions. And we do have customers now that are heavily in incorporating ESG and patent data to their investment decisions. So we see a big increase. Just recently, last week, we saw that the demand is really high at an alternative data conference, and I expect this to increase very much in the next 2 years.
Thank you. I think that answers the question. Leads me to a question, by the way, because you, in your role for global sales strategy, you get to see a lot of different customer types and industries. I know that you've been in touch on the topic with the big consulting companies and the big financial advisories, they're called. What's their take on patents? I know that 10 years back, that was a much slower topic for them. How does it look like today?
Yeah, very interesting question. Thank you, Marco. So what we see the rise of IP relevance in big management and strategy consulting companies. I'm not going to name them, but basically any of the big 5 are building up IP departments or IP related positions in their companies. So we see a big ramp of IP expertise in these management consulting companies. And interestingly, we also see very new and a lot of new job titles related to ESG and also SDG at these consulting companies, roles that were created the last 2 years. You can easily track that, and the demand for patent data is growing from that vertical as well.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, maybe a good time to take a look at one additional takeaway. So what I did with my team is take a look at the top 100 corporate patent portfolio owners worldwide, and we took a look at their annual reporting and their sustainability reports. And interestingly, we can see that 75% of these companies are mentioning SDGs as relevant for their strategy and relevant for their overall business objectives. So that was really interesting. So looking at the top 100 corporate patent owners, 21% of these companies are from the US. And we see that whether it be in China, whether it be in Germany, US, especially also in Japan, we see a strong focus on SDG and that they are recognizing the significance of the SDGs for their business strategies. That's why we think that these business objectives will or are aligning with IP strategy, and it is good as a lawyer or patent professional to quickly familiarize themselves with SDGs from a patent perspective. We think that Patentside and LexisNexis have designed and created a way that makes it easily accessible.
Yeah, on the flip side, we're working with many IP law firms around the world already, and for sure with tons of corporate IP departments. And we see that the topic of ESG and SDG is becoming more and more prominent. We get a lot of questions, especially also on how to design KPIs to measure progress in these areas. Companies around the world are going actively to their patent departments and are asking for their contribution. They're building sustainability into their IP strategies even. So this is not a topic only for the United Nations and for governments anymore. It really talking about our ecosystem. It really goes down to the individual patent departments, the heads of IPs, the patent lawyers, the patent analysts and searchers. So it's really cool to see this new topic coming to life, and I'm very glad we're able to contribute to one of the biggest challenges of our times currently. Let me just go through the questions here again. We have a couple more minutes left. So those who are interested in SDG and ESG data, what do they use it for? Well, I think there's various use cases around the data. Let's start very simple. If you're a corporate and you haven't really thought about measuring ESG or SDG through the lens of patents yet, first and foremost, you want to understand where are we at. So what are our own assets that contribute to these areas? And the next step could be to compare it to what your competitors have done and break it down into the individual areas, for example, the SDGs that we've shown here today. And then a typical next step would be to define KPIs. So by time X, we want to have a certain technological position. We want to be number X and in the field, or we want to have an X share of our portfolio contribute to a certain space that we as a company are committed to as well. And we want our IP to contribute to that as well. We want our IP to protect our efforts in that space. So that could be one use case. Another use case could be you're looking at an M&A target, and nowadays you're also wondering about sustainability aspects around that M&A target and sustainability aspects even around the IP portfolio. So in which areas are they adding to your own assets, in which areas are they bringing in new aspects, and which are the areas of maybe even harmful IP, and not harmful in just being a risk from, let's say, an infringement perspective or a licensing perspective, but even from a technology that you as a company have chosen not to employ anymore, right? So these are just two examples of how companies would be interested in that. Ben, do you see any more questions there? Trying to find ones. There's nuances sometimes that are new, but
no, I think you pretty much covered them all. But I know that it's a lot to digest. I think we went through various stages. So from a bird's eye perspective down to the patent level. We can only encourage any participant, if there are any questions after the webinar, to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions and also to provide more information.
Cool.
Ali?
Yeah, so as I had said in the beginning, we will make the presentation available. Also had some follow-up questions about the definitions of the fields. We'll definitely be in touch. Also see some demo requests and access requests there, and we'll make sure to follow up on all of these. Thank you very much. It was very vivid participation in the chat. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben and Marco. And as Marco mentioned, you will be receiving a recording and the slides of today's presentation via email later today. And thank you again all for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.